Mr. Ed Morse, on the revolution in the market structure, will there be a revolution or not?
Thanks very much, Rair. It's an honor to be and a privilege to be with the leadership of the global energy industry and the leadership of the energy sector in this country, which is the only one in the world with any potential to become a truly global energy superpower. It's also a challenge, after all of the remarks that have been made, to add to the debate, and I see that Rair is prodding me to talk about revolutionary change and to talk about the one thing which strangely has not really been discussed, and that is the nature of the markets, and they are different markets, which characterize the international trade in natural gas. So it's going to be my focus on the markets, and as an appropriate focus on the markets, I'd like to reflect, as John Maynard Keynes did some 3/4 of a century ago, when asked to define what a transition is. And he said a transition is a point between two transitions. And that is an appropriate way of looking at today's gas market in Europe, because as a transition, we know it's going from some place to another place. And while there are many temptations for those who have benefited by structures that emerged in a previous generation to maintain those structures into the next generation, it's the very change in markets that make it extremely difficult, if not impossible, to resuscitate structures that played a useful role at one point, but not necessarily going forward. And this is really the strategic dilemma confronting Russia's place in the European gas industry. And when we look at markets, we tend to think of the oil market, which is a truly global market. And then when we tend to think of the uses to which gas is put, which is in power generation, those markets are extremely local in their nature and not fully integrated in their nature. And as a result of that, the world has emerged with three very different kinds of market mechanisms that are useful for buyers and sellers in the buying and selling of natural gas. The original international contracts were really LNG contracts, and they were designed for a Japanese market in which the power sector burned crude oil. So naturally, the LNG contracts developed by Jim Ulva's company Phillips and by others out of Indonesia to fuel the Japanese market were benchmarked off of the alternative fuel, which was crude oil. And naturally, when Gazuni was involved with its owners in defining a European pipeline market, the alternative fuels test was a combination of fuel oil and gas oil. So naturally, the pipeline contracts into Europe have been based not on crude oil, but on intermediate fuels. And similarly, in the US and the UK, as those markets became deregulated and gas-on-gas competition took place, an appropriate natural gas benchmark existed. And the crossroads of the revolution is not so much the shale revolution or the unconventional gas revolution. It isn't even so much the rapid development of regasification and storage facilities within the European continent. No, the real challenge and the real potential for revolutionary change is how to deal with old structures in a world in which there are these three different kinds of local markets. And they're not only a Japanese, a European, and a US-UK market, but these three markets are all embodied within the European continent, where we have an Eastern Europe that is tied to, absolutely tied to oil-linked contracts, a Mediterranean and Central Europe, which is a mixed environment for spot contracts and long-term oil-linked contracts, and a growing wedge into this continent from the UK through the Benelux countries into Germany and France, in which there really is true gas-on-gas competition. And the challenge that really needs to be confronted by the emerging energy superpower is how to preserve the old and prepare for the new, how to deal with the preservation of an old system of contracts, and yet be in a position to develop new markets as they persist, and to have a main plan, but to have a backup plan. And the reason for a backup plan is because not necessarily that the market is going to revolutionarily change, but because the market could change, and it could change potentially depending on circumstances. Certainly, the availability of LNG on a spot basis into Europe is one earmark of change. One tends to be optimistic these days because one had weather coming to the rescue of old contracts. One had Russian ingenuity paring back on minimum volume takes, on decreasing take-or-pay requirements, and increasing a share of sales on a spot basis. But what if next winter is very warm? What if next winter we not only have the current 30 BCM of gas that Qatar has under maintenance, but that back in the market along with 2 new trains of gas that were meant to supply the U.S. market and won't supply the U.S. market? And what if all of this haunts Europe? So I think it would be prudent for Russian decision makers to think about 2 things. One is the dilemma that Saudi Arabia found itself in 1985, a time when it was holding on to an old long-term contract format and the rest of the world saw declining demand and a new form of spot-based contract. And Russian production finally fell from 9 million barrels a day to 8 to 7 to 6 to 5 to finally 2.5. And the Russian government decided, the Saudi government decided that it would have to revolutionarily change the nature of those markets. That's one thing that certainly has to be in the back of the minds of Russian decision makers. The other is to recognize that there are other countries that went through this change of market structure internally, including the United States and including the United Kingdom. And in where there was a debate about whether long-term projects could be financed in the absence of a long-term contract that had a price clause in it that was based on something understandable and transparent. And there were mechanisms that developed. And you're right, Minister Sechin, to say that the European market does not have a deep liquid forward structure for a gas contract market. But neither did the United States when the U.S. deregulated in the middle of the 1980s. But that deregulation encouraged such a market. We also invented such things as cost mitigation clauses, which required minimal payments as long take-or-pay contracts were replaced. And there were other new clauses invented. So my message is markets do change, markets evolve. It's good to hold on to the old and hold on to the mechanisms that are required to finance new major projects, such as those currently under suspension on the Yamal Peninsula. But it's also prudent to recognize that change is inevitable and it may change may take place a little bit faster than otherwise one might expect. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ed.
Well, I would like to give the floor to some of the oil and gas majors, and of course, Alexei Miller will take the floor first. He's head of Gazprom. Alexei, what you think the issues discussed could impact Gazprom going forward? Do you think this is a major concern? What could be changing? Well, to start with, I'm very pleased to be in this audience today, to be able to contribute personally to the issues of gas markets discussed. This is exactly the audience that brings together the head figures in the world. We may not be meeting each other very often, but of course we are following closely any events, publications, developments every day. I'll start my working day with looking through the reviews of the Russian, European, Asian publications on gas markets, and almost every day I come across quotations from the speeches made, so addresses made by people present in this audience. Importantly, the key trends as we see on the gas market is, of course, markets becoming global. And I think this is the key driving force. Gazprom has adopted a new strategy for its development as a global markets player, as a global player on a global gas market, as a global gas company. These are key and important areas. The first one is diversification of our markets. We work based on the markets, and our slogan is very simple. Gas should be sold first and then produced and transported. This is the first premise. So we're working based on the markets and take into account the globalization. We're forced to diversify our markets. And over the past 4 decades, we mostly have focused on Europe. Starting this time, today, Gazprom has been supplying gas to Asian markets and to North American markets. This has become possible due to another very important strategies of ours, which is diversification of the end products Gazprom produces. And of course, the liquefied natural gas is one of those. The emergence of LNG has allowed the market to become globalized very fast, and the very fact that the consumer market is very remote from the production areas is getting less and less important, again thanks to the exchanges. And Gazprom, as the company supplying pipeline gas, we exchange our natural gas for the liquefied natural gas that arrives in Europe, and based on our own contracts we supply LNG for quite a few years now to the United States of America, to Japan, South Korea and other countries and other markets. We'll be increasing the scope and scale of these transactions going forward. And of course it's very important to be able to diversify transportation routes, and this is particularly important for the European Union. And so here we share the same vision, the same strategic approach. The number of export pipelines that supply Russian gas to Europe should be growing, and we seem to be sharing mutual visions and interests on that. European Union markets keep buzzing about what will be happening to Europe's gas markets, how will be going forward. So there are different estimates, but for Gazprom, what is particularly important in terms of increasing our supplies of gas to Europe is, of course, and has been and will be, reducing the volumes of production across the countries of European Union, and by the companies that produce from European gas fields. I will not give you any statistics, but this is a trend that seems to be the determining one, but not the factor of the increasing demand for gas with the end consumers across Europe, either retail or industry consumers. It is the decreased production across Europe that is important.